Hey, Colleen, how are you?
Good. How about you, Andrew?
I can't complain. It's a beautiful day here in Virginia. And one of my favorite things about seeing you is I used to always have the opportunity to ask you, where in the world are you? And you would have the most mind blowing answer. I can never guess where you'd be. But where are you now?
I am in Worcester, Massachusetts, which I learned in January you pronounce as Worcester, not Worcester or anything like that. But I've been permanently up here for the last 7 months.
How many times did you have to say it out loud before you got it right?
Well, when I was going up to consult for Greater Good, like late last year, when I was still doing the consulting practice, I told my friend initially, like, "Oh, I got a client up in Massachusetts," and they're like, "Where?" I was like, "Worcester." They were like, "You will get laughed out of the building if you say that up there." So they helped me out quite a bit to make sure that I didn't make a fool of myself.
For me, when I meet someone for the first time, I feel like I have to say their name at least 7 times intentionally to finally get it. I feel like saying Worcester, Mass. I would have to probably go like 700 times before I stop making that mistake.
It gets pretty natural pretty quickly, but initially, I mean, it's so non-intuitive. It's not how you spell it at all.
So for the past while, I mean, I met you when you and your brother were running Second Sip Beverage Consulting, and you had been a frequent contributor to CBP. You gave talks on portfolio strategy. One I really loved, craft lagers competing with big beer. You led a panel, Women Conquering Craft Beer. And while you were doing that, you were traveling all across the country. What do
Yeah.
you miss about that?
I mean, traveling for sure. I mean, I just love traveling. I love, especially doing that, kind of coming out of the COVID fog, and like just getting back on the road, interacting with people, seeing friends that I hadn't seen for a while, connecting with new breweries, whether they became clients or not. Like, that was certainly just a blast overall. So I missed that, but I think the thing I missed the most when I was in that mode was, from a professional perspective, just like being like a fully ingrained part of a team. Like as much as a consultant, you try to embed yourself in with your clients, and I like to think I, have really great lasting relationships with everyone that I worked with, and we got connected and like ingrained with their teams. Like it's just never the same as like you know the day in day out like shared vision, trying to mentor people, develop them, like grow the brand collectively. Nothing compares to that.
It's even more challenging when you're doing a lot of it virtually, as we did the past
Yes.
2 years.
Yes. So it is nice to be in a full team, like in one spot, all of that. But I'd be silly to say I didn't miss some of the travel and like always on to something new every other day or week. Or I mean, I had done one of my stints while I was traveling when you were literally like, I can't guess where you are. I had hit 20 cities. I went all the way around the country, like from North Carolina, looped up, like cross up to the Pacific Northwest, all the way down, the Pacific Coast Highway, and then back a southern route. So a giant circle essentially around the country. And I did 20 cities in like 3.5 months. So like total road warrior at that
You
point.
are making me so jealous. I need to be on the road right now.
It was fun. It was fun.
So, in that big circle, what was the most surprising place you visited?
Most surprising, maybe Boise, Idaho. Like, I didn't really know what to expect. I had some people be like, "No, it's actually cool," and I'm like, "Really?" Like, you don't hear that much. If anyone's listening from Idaho, not trying to offend anyone, but I had a blast in Boise. Like, a super fun area. I had also never been to Vancouver, Canada, and I was able to get up there for about a week, so that was pretty cool. But yeah, those were a couple of the highlights for sure.
So, I remember probably when I was a teenager, there was this movie that came out where like a couple was traveling across the country to find the perfect city to raise a family. So, let's transition that over to beer. If you were trying to find the perfect craft beer city to put your roots in, was there anywhere along the way that you could envision just living and becoming part of that community? Nothing against where you're at now, but just curious if you found anything, unexpected along the way.
Well, I mean, naturally, I have to say Worcester, Massachusetts for sure.
You were, but they're number one. What's number two?
We'll see number two. I mean, it's tough to answer just off of like a vibe of visiting there because I'm a analytically oriented person. So if I'm ever consulting somebody on like startups and all of that, it's like, all right, you got to crunch the numbers and look at craft sales and breweries per capita and like breweries per craft sale and like, you know, what percent is local versus national. And you go into all of these different things that make something, you know, ripe for
I love
whether
it.
or not it would be a good or bad business move. But in terms of like lifestyle wise, I mean, I probably go back to, you know, not from a business perspective because there is a level
Sure.
of saturation, but just in terms of place to live. Like, I was able to spend some time back in the Pacific Northwest, and I lived in Portland, Oregon for many years, and so just the culture and vibe and beer centricity of the Pacific Northwest, like, you know, that's always going to be on my radar as a spot that, you know, anyone who's in the beer business to plant their flag there and be a part of that community is such a fortunate person.
And Portland's obviously a great beer city. Were
Yeah.
you working in the beer industry while you were there?
Yeah, so I was at Craft Brew Alliance, headquartered in Portland I lived there for like 4 years, I want to say, and then Craft Brew Alliance shipped me back east to run their East Coast business, and I did that for a couple of years before we got acquired by AB. So I've been bi-coastal in my craft beer experience, but Portland was a blast for sure, and even like, you know, I got to spend a little bit more time in Bend, Oregon than I had even when I lived there when I was traveling. It was like I just hadn't gotten out there that much when I lived in Portland, but I was like, oh, I'm gonna like camp out there for a week while I'm on this, you know, adventure. And so that was a blast because so many amazing breweries out in that neck of the woods.
Absolutely. So when you were working for the Craft Brew Alliance, what kind of work were you doing?
Yeah, so I started with them as a kind of director of strategy, and I was leading kind of strategic planning, corporate strategy, you know, commercial planning for all of our different, you know, brands. We had eight breweries in the portfolio, so it was kind of juggling kind of what are our plans by region, and you know, what are our plans for a brand like Widmer Brothers or Red Hook that's been so established versus Kona, which was like crazy growth engine, versus some of the brands that we were partnering with and then eventually acquired. But my role was able to expand quite a bit there. I built out kind of our entire analytics team to really dive deep on like industry trends and what was going on and how our business was stacking up against that. I had the pleasure of you know, driving our mergers and acquisitions for a while with the crazy experience with the team there of us closing 3 acquisitions all on the same day.
Wow.
Something, if anyone has ever been in M&A work at all, I do not recommend. It was like, I don't think me and our general counsel Marcus and like half the team slept probably for like the 3 weeks leading up to getting those deals closed. But that was certainly an awesome experience working with so many of our different partners and the founders at those breweries to make sure that we were a good fit and that we had shared vision for, you know, what we would do in a, you know, post acquisition world to kind of take those breweries to the next level. And then naturally it was a like no good deed goes unpunished. So, you know, they were like, hey, you know, Colleen, you've just been involved with all of these breweries for the acquisition. How about you move back east and, you know, help manage them and you know, bring to life that vision that we had. So I was able to wear a lot of different hats. My last role with them was kind of general manager of the East Coast, which included those breweries as well as continuing to drive Kona growth out east. So yeah, a lot of different things going on in my time at CBA. I am so fortunate that that's where I kind of started my journey into working in the industry because I was able touch so many different breweries, right? When you work for a portfolio company, you get to experience big, small, old, new, you name it, and all sorts of different geographies that they were located in. So you get immersed in kind of what the market looks like, you know, around the U.S. But also just like phenomenal people to learn from. So shout out to all the old Craft Brew Alliance crew for sure.
Sounds like an amazing experience because you got to interact with so many unique people across all the brands. I can only imagine how much it prepared you for, you know, your new role as recently promoted CEO at Greater Good, which we're going to dive into shortly.
For
But
sure.
before we go into the future, I want to go back. I want to go back, you know, if we had met when you were just a kid, Colleen, and I said, Colleen, what do you want to be when you grow up? What would your answer have been back then?
So that's a funny question because my answer as a like real young kid would have been a lifeguard. I don't know why. I think it was like, I don't know, like Baywatch or different movies. I was like, oh, you get paid to like swim and twirl a whistle around. Sounds great. So I'm one of the few people who get to say that I like lived my childhood dream, because as a high schooler and in college, I was a lifeguard. So check, got that done really early. And then it
Yeah,
was
you
like,
can retire now and just go lay on a beach without having to work.
exactly. So then it was like, oh, well, I've already accomplished my lifelong dream of being a lifeguard. What's next? But I wasn't like intending really, I wasn't like setting out to get into the beer business initially. I was working at CarMax straight out of college as like a head of corporate strategy for CarMax, used car retailer. Also a great place to work, worked with a ton of phenomenal people. But I was like, used cars just aren't really doing it for me. Craft beer versus used cars, that felt like a no-brainer.
So
But I
let's
was
pause
really,
there for a second, though, because it seems like strategy is something that you're very good at and you enjoy very much.
yes.
So, at what point, after you retired from being a lifeguard, did you focus on, the strategy portion of running a business?
Yeah, so I mean, I was a business major in college, and I think had a kind of natural strategic bent. I think the way my brain works is a lot of like trying to connect the dots and explore different alternatives, which to me are like the two most critical like mindsets to have as a career strategist. If I had to like dub myself as anything, that's probably how I would describe what my career has mostly looked like in my post lifeguard phases, obviously. But yeah, I like just like all of the inner workings behind it. I like that it, isn't just like numbers on a paper or like, thinking about things. There's like an art and science behind it. There's like the people, the processes, the systems that all need to come together to work. I love exploring like markets and how industries work overall, and how businesses and brands are differentiated within that. I know we've talked, anytime I've done stuff with you from a CBP perspective, like differentiation is probably the like drinking game that somebody should play for any past panels, because like that's just so critical, I think, for any successful business in any industry. So I loved that aspect of strategy as well.
So, at what point did you decide you wanted to take that strategy experience to the beer industry?
Back in, gosh, 2015, maybe 20, probably I decided in 2014ish that I was like kind of looking like, all right, what's going to be next for me after CarMax. But like I said, I wasn't dead set on beer at the time. I literally went through like LinkedIn filters of like cool cities and what I thought would be like cool jobs, like both like super air quotes there, because like I had an experience. I knew I wanted to stay in strategy, but then I basically checked anything that was like retail or CPG oriented. I like, cool for me from a industry perspective is like something that can connect and be tangible to consumers. Like, people buy cars, people buy beer, people consume things. Like, I wanted something that as I was talking to about my job with my friends, that they could get what I did in a way that wasn't like, hey, I sell software and I do, whatever nebulous kind of, nebulous but very critical and important work for others. That just wasn't what I wanted to do. So checked a lot of industries and stuff, and then checked like 50 cities, some of which I had been to, some that I had never. And then suddenly this
You
crap.
had a spreadsheet to kind of detailing all this, of course.
I did not have a spreadsheet. I literally just had like a saved search on LinkedIn, and like whatever would pop up every day, I'd be like, all right, maybe I'll apply. And so I took my time figuring it out. But then when the Craft Brew Alliance job in Portland, Oregon, as like a head of strategy, I was like, all right, that's checking too many boxes. Got to throw my hat in the ring for that. To be honest, didn't think they were going to hire me. But it ended up working out, great fit, and the rest is history. I can't see myself ever leaving the beer business.
Were you a beer person before you started working for the Craft Brew Alliance?
I was a beer consumer for sure, but I didn't know any of the business side of things. I actually joke around saying like, I did a really great job at kind of, BSing my way through a lot of parallels between the used car industry and the beer business, because I thought that like I was just going to get grilled so hard on not having experience. So I was like, fragmented industry, highly regulated, 3-tier system, like bam, 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 like it's the same thing. And people were like, huh, okay, wouldn't have thought about it that way.
So that's so funny you just dove into that, because after like 5 minutes ago, I made a few notes, and one of those was, what does the strategy of cars have in common with the beer industry? And you were already thinking about that. So
Have to.
let's dive into it a little bit deeper. What are some of the similarities you experienced?
Yeah, I mean, so I think first and foremost, it's the fragmented industry, right? Like breweries are now like, if you run a brewery, you're one of 9,000, right? And, we were the market leader at CarMax at the time. I don't know any of their updated numbers. They're still the market leader, but they were the market leader with like at the time, maybe a 2 or 3% market share. So like, and that made them like 2 to 3x bigger than what the like second largest was at the time. So like hugely fragmented. I mean, there's like 40,000 used car dealers across the US. Um, so just that notion of like, how do you compete? It is hyper local, right? Like people buy from their local dealer, people go to their local brewery. So there's like kind of a similar notion of how do you like connect with the community and how do you stand out and, differentiate from that perspective. But yeah, then the like, regulation and kind of, route to market isn't 100% in your control. So there's like, all of those hurdles of how you have to navigate that because you're not, always interacting with your end consumer. You have to think about like, all right, you're working through a dealer who might be working through a manufacturer. So yeah, I mean, there are like structural similarities, I would say, to the industry, but then the biggest difference, right? Like it's a like once every 5 years, $30,000 purchase versus hopefully a few times a week, ideally like getting up there in terms of how much folks are spending on beer. But the like frequency and kind of like use case is obviously like such a different way of thinking.
No, thank you for that. One of my favorite things to do is learn from other industries. If we keep talking in the craft beer industry, just recycling ideas, we're not going to go to many places. But if we can learn from others and apply it to craft beer, I think we can innovate and go different directions, which is always really fun to see what happens.
Yeah, I don't know that it's informing any innovation these days of my car days, but I definitely agree with the like sourcing inspiration and learning from other people and other industries.
I don't want to take any jobs, but have you heard any rumblings about like a self brewing system to get rid of all the employees? Everybody joking.
No, and I think that would probably make terrible beer.
I agree with you on that one.
It's like what was it, the like almost like I'm not a Keurig coffee person because I think it makes really crappy coffee, but they had that like Keurig version of cocktails that I don't know if that's still around or ever gotten off the ground, but like it's kind of like watery, subpar. I feel like I'm gonna get some hate if somebody's like, that's my concept, but there's still like artsmanship and the craft and like the and the joy of being able to hear the personal stories behind it and being like me being able to say like, oh, like this beer, like Pat, my head brewer, came up with that recipe and like that personal connection behind it. So I hope that never leaves the craft beer space. It's more likely to leave the like macro brewed space, but craft I think will hang on to those roots forever.
And the experience of craft beer is one of the best parts about our industry.
Yeah.
So let's dive into where you are now, though. You're at Greater Good, Worcester, Mass. Did I say it correctly?
Yeah, you were close enough. You're good.
Fantastic. So, I mean, after you left the Craft Brew Alliance, you ran Second Sip Beverage Consulting with your brother. You were a consultant for quite a bit of breweries. How did you end up at Greater Good?
Yeah, so shout out to anyone on who's thinking about trying to push their business on CBP because Paul, our founder, actually saw like a portfolio strategy presentation I had given.
He's so happy right now.
So he had seen that, and I had seen like some stuff that was going on. So like I don't know who reached out first, but like he was certainly intrigued by that, and asked if I would consult for a little bit. So I came up to Worcester, like did kind of a good assessment and, tried to understand strengths and opportunities across like their team and operations and build out a little bit of like what I thought could be a pathway for growth. And then as I was doing that, he started to like kind of plant the seed in my head that he was trying to think through succession planning and eventually wanted to like take more of a back seat out of the day to day. And then between kind of the output of the consulting work and that, he made me an offer. And, like I was saying, like I really missed being a part of a team, but I wouldn't have jumped out of consulting for just any team. Like I wasn't necessarily actively looking for a full-time role. Like if something came up, like I wasn't going to not have a conversation. But it was that particular team coupled with, again, like differentiation being something I'm so passionate about, to like work with company that was founded as like one of one, right? The first and only all Imperial Brewing company. Just super intrigued at like what that could be and like what kind of like trying to dominate a specific segment of the industry would look like. So that, and then I was up there having a bunch of beers, and like, the beers were phenomenal, and, pack a good punch. So that somehow, glossed me over enough to say yes to this gig.
It sounds like a match made in heaven. It's so fascinating to look at the mission behind Greater Good. I mean, the goal is to be the authority on Imperial high ABV beers in the craft beer market. It's, looking at that goal, and so many people, as we referenced earlier, typically drinking the mass produced, light American lagers. How do you educate your average beer drinker about these Imperial beers?
Yeah, I mean, so first and foremost, like I think it was like my second or third week on the job, and I said, we need to do some consumer research, right? Like we can't pretend like we know the answer, or that, everyone speaks our language, which I think is a big risk that, craft beer gets into enough. Like we can get a little bit in our echo chamber or be speaking in our terms and not in the consumer's terms. So I partnered with a firm that I had worked with a lot in the past called Consumer Dynamics to do a ton of focus groups and really test out all of the different like elements and stories behind the brand and how we were talking about ourselves, and threw in stuff of like, things about us that we weren't really talking about, but like maybe that resonates with people. And one of the things, and this was a hypothesis I had going in, was that most consumers don't know what the word imperial means. So naturally it's like gut punch, right? Like, oh my gosh, I just joined this like differentiated company that their point of differentiation no one understands. But it was like, all right, I kind of thought that might be the case. Not everyone's like beer geek or up on that lingo, but we were able to kind of figure out a way for us to more clearly articulate our brand positioning as bigger, bolder, stronger, which for us like clicks on a lot of ways. One, it way more simply and concisely explains our products. When you're not having to use imperial, you can describe them as like bigger and stronger from an ABV, bolder and more complex flavors and kind of full flavored aspect. And that's speaking kind of consumer language, right? So it describes the products without having to use that word, imperial, that no one's gonna like fully understand. Then it also, was able for us to like harken back to our origin story of being bold and doing something completely different that no one else was doing, because people did love hearing that we were like the first and only ones, and that like we weren't just taking the same approach as every other brewery. And then like last but not least, and I always think this is the biggest kicker, where you go from like, all right, do you have beloved beers and beloved products to are you a beloved brand? And that's making that emotional connection. And what we found with our target consumer was that this notion of like living boldly and like being courageous was this like aspirational lifestyle, and like being associated with a company or a brand that also embodied that, like really brought like a lot of like strong emotional, like evocative reaction. And so when you can like explain your product, explain your company, and like make an emotional connection with your consumer all in a pretty simple and concise way, like, I think, that gives us a lot of run room for how we activate that and grow off of that platform.
Absolutely. So bigger, bolder, stronger. Now, Greater Good, you opened up in 2016, and Paul, the founder, was a microbial geneticist, which sounds super impressive.
Yes, so please don't ask me any questions about that, because I will not be able to answer.
We're not going to dive into the science right now. We're business people here, Colleen.
Yes.
So when he opened the brewery, was the goal to always be a high ABV, producer?
Yeah, I mean, Paul personally had a huge passion for Imperial beers, and candidly just wasn't finding something out on the market that like he really loved. I think, his big pain point that he was trying to solve for was so many big beers, at least at that time, still had like a boozy afterburn or still kind of a harsh taste to it. And like, that wasn't the vibe he wanted. He still wanted something like super drinkable and like well balanced. So he was like, let me just see if I can make this myself, right? And so he had set out initially home brewing, as most people as they get into this industry. So he was experimenting around, and then being kind of a scientist by trade, right? He took more of a like test and learn, proof and concept kind of way. So we're one of the few breweries out there that like didn't open with a tap room in a physical space out the gate. We started by contract brewing and like pushing it straight out to distributors to say like, is it going to actually sell in the market? And like instantly everything was selling out like crazy fast. Then it was like, oh, this might, like he always says, like, all right, I guess this like might be a business, not just a hobby, and like other people might enjoy this. And then so began kind of the exploration to find the site here in Worcester, build out our own brewery, and like bring this to life in a bigger, bolder, stronger way.
When did the tap room come into play?
I believe the tap room opened in 2018, maybe it was late 17, but so about a couple of years after the business was started. So they were contract brewing and distributing and growing that way without any tap room sales for the first 2 years, which again I'm just always intrigued by any company that like does something different or takes kind of a different approach. So it was super intriguing to be like, whoa, you are not following the like standard playbook. And Paul's always like, well, who created the standards? Like, that doesn't really matter. So I gotta love, I mean, he's a serial entrepreneur. So like love that mentality of like break the rules, try stuff out, prove that it works, go bigger from there. And then thus doing it in a really like prudent way where you're not like over investing behind something that like who knows if it's gonna work.
In conversations with Paul over, of course, Imperial Beers, have there been any parts to his serial entrepreneurial life that have been very interesting to you? Like, was there this one off the wall product or idea that he tried to take to market? We might have to bring Paul on for this one later.
Yeah, I don't know if it's been like an off the wall product or anything. I think one of the things that was refreshing about like my early conversations with Paul and have since proven out to be the case was of all of the different founders that I've worked with over my time, whether it was at CBA or while I was consulting or while I was at AB after they had acquired us. Paul was amongst the most self-aware and maybe almost self-deprecating founder that I've ever known. Like he's very clear that like his strength is starting something and having the idea and the vision to get something off the ground. But like big part of the reason that he was like, hey, I want to bring somebody else on board wasn't just because like he was looking to like take a little bit of a backseat out of the day-to-day operations, but it was because he was like, I want to see this thing flourish. And so I need to bring in people who have more experience than I do, or experience going from that 10,000 barrelage to 20,000 barrelage range versus like, it's like I feel really good about what I've built from 0 to 10,000. Like I don't know that I'm the guy to go from 10 to 20 or 10 to 50 or 10 to sky's the limit. And that level of just like understanding, which I think comes from being a serial entrepreneur. Like you can be a startup guy versus a like scalable growth person. Like those are different mindsets and different ways you have to think about the business. And that level of self-awareness is not something I mean, you don't often see with people at large, but I think, there's that expression, right? Like brewers have egos, right? Like founders have egos is the like next layer beyond that, right? Like, I mean, it's their baby. They built these things. But Paul was so like even keeled, like I want to bring in experts. I want to build a team around me that is, smarter than I am. And I'm like, I don't know any of the science stuff. So I don't know that I'm smarter than you, but I do appreciate us playing off of each other's strengths.
I really respect that about Paul, because it's hard for an entrepreneur in any industry to, say that they need help. It's hard to ask for help sometimes. It's hard to reach out to a consultant. It's hard to admit that you might not be the best person for the job. And, when you get to that point, you can accept that, there's people smarter than you and you should bring in people like yourself to guide the next chapter. I think it really opens the door for opportunity and more success. I'm sure he'll start another fascinating business.
Yeah, and it also unlocks him to like. I mean, he's not out of the day to day. Like, I don't want anyone to think like Paul's been like, peace out, Colleen. Here's the keys. I'm off. He's still such a great strategic thought partner. And as we look at expansion opportunities in particular, whether that's additional production space or additional tap room locations, like he wants to be on that corporate development expansion mode, which falls much more into that startup-y kind of gears cranking. And I'm like, great, like if you can be investing some of your manpower on that, then I can help make sure that day in day out, like we've got strong beers, like strong innovation pipeline. Beers are coming out on time, they're tasting great, we're marketing them well, we're selling them well, like all of that. It's like a good divide and conquer approach.
Now, when he brought you in as the chief commercial officer, was the plan to eventually have you take over the role as CEO?
Yeah, I mean, it was very much talked about before I joined. I don't think it was, had I not performed, I don't think it would have been a foregone conclusion, right? Like, I think there was a little bit of a hedge there of like, I'm not going to bring you in as CEO. We're going to like see how this works. But it also allowed me to like get my feet underneath me originally on the commercial side of the business, which is more my wheelhouse, sales, marketing, strategy, all that, before absorbing kind of the operational responsibilities as well. But we also, I mean, we hadn't chiseled out like timeline or anything on that. So I was a little bit surprised when like we sat down and he was like, so I'm thinking like July 1st is the day. And I'm like, the day for what? What's happening July 1st? And he's like, I think that's when like you should take over. And I'm like,
How much notice did he give you? Were like you just having beers like the week before? Like, you know what? I feel right about this. Next week, it's you. Like, what was the timeline like there?
oh, I don't know. I want to say that was late April, early May that he
You
told
had a
me.
little bit of notice. It wasn't completely sprung.
Yeah, because then we talked about announcing it internally on June 1st so that like people weren't like hearing it as we were trying to like push it out there, and that there could be good kinds of handoffs and transitions. And also like we were hiring for some spots, and I was like, well, we need to announce this at some point so that like people are like, well, what, like, we're hiring somebody in ops, like why is the chief commercial officer the one like interviewing me? And so there was just like some pragmatic things like that like we needed to make sure that all wired out. But yeah, it wasn't like completely blindsided, but certainly when we had that conversation, I was pleasantly surprised that like after what, that was maybe 4 months on the job, that he was feeling good enough about the direction that we were headed, and how we were working together, that he was feeling confident enough. Like that trust and kind of that he's given me, like no one should ever take lightly when any founder is saying like, hey, like run the business that I poured blood, sweat, and tears and money and all that into opening. That's such a flattering thing to hear from anyone.
100%. I commend Paul for having that succession plan, because so many business owners, don't have a plan for, when they want to pass it along to somebody, or what if they were hit by a bus on the way home from work. They don't often think ahead of who's going to lead my company into the next chapter.
Yeah,
So
again, part of the strength of him being a serial entrepreneur, like I think you learn by doing a little bit on some of that.
I'm sure. So, when it became a thing that you were taking over as CEO, what are some tips that you could offer to others, maybe having some sort of transition that are similar, that helped with the process?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me it was a little bit interesting because I had been in consulting before I even joined, and then I was in my CCO role before I advanced. So I had the time to like get to know the team and get to know like ways that we were working, or why we had done things one way versus another. Because I think the big thing that you always have to balance is like, you want to come into a role like this and like have an impact and have ideas and like implement stuff right out the gate, but like you also don't want to like come in like a wrecking ball bulldozer. Obviously, like Greater Good was doing phenomenal things, putting out phenomenal beers, like all of that, like way before I got involved. So like you don't want to like just blow shit up for the hell of it kind of deal. Like, so you want to be, connect with the team. You want to really seek first to understand versus like a listen first mentality is probably, one of the most important things, which as a chatty extroverted human is like I have to be like, be quiet, Colleen. Like just sit there and say nothing.
Was there any challenges along the way, or any challenges that you perhaps foresee, even moving forward? Because we're only a month and a couple days past July 1st.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's always learning curve, right? Of like trying to understand the full history behind to fully understand some of the context. That just takes time, right? And I don't pretend like I've known every type of beer that we've tried or like what we released and then killed or all of these different things. And so, obviously I have a team around me that knows all of that history so that when I ask those questions, they can be like, actually, we tried something like that, way back when, and it did or didn't work out. So there's a level of being able to learn from that, but so there's challenges I think without knowing all of that history that you have to just take the time to and ask the questions to learn. But that's also a pretty freeing place of being like, I don't really care necessarily why we're doing something the way we're doing it now. Like that doesn't mean that we can't like revisit. I mean, there's so much innovation and new processes and different things that we can think about, different yeast strains that are now designed way more so for like specifically high ABV stuff that it's like that didn't exist back when we were starting. So like we're using this particular yeast and it's having trouble like attenuating up to the like high octane status that we want. Like no sacred cows, right? Like, we should be willing to explore anything. So I think it's just that balancing act of like appreciating and trying to understand that history, but also not being, scared to bring that fresh perspective. But that's a balancing act for sure.
And I'm sure you enjoy every moment of it.
Yeah. Also, candidly, like I'm not a brewer, like operations person by trade. So like any time in my career that I've taken over and had like, brewers reporting into me and production folks reporting into me, like that's always personally a trickier thing where like that's not my core area of expertise. And you want to be able to manage and guide and like, have ideas without like coming at it from like an uneducated perspective. So that's always for me a balancing act. I've always used my like Brian phone a friend to my brother since he's a brewer. I'd be like, hey, give me an idea here. Like, am I thinking about this the right way? So that like, and just leverage the network to like kind of gut check some of your assumptions or like, yo, we're doing it this way. Like, and the way it was explained to me, like it kind of makes sense, but it also feels different than how I've seen. Like, tell me if I should be thinking about something different. And just being able to have that network of people to tap into is really helpful when you're managing anybody that does a specific function that they're way more the expert at than you are.
No, it's great, the craft beer community, and you didn't have the ability to reach out to obviously your brother, but others in the industry, for advice, because you're
Yep.
new to this role. You're still learning. We're all still learning.
Yep.
But looking ahead, what are some of your goals for Greater Good? Is there any, say, top 3 list of objectives you're looking to knock off in the near to distant future?
Well, so our like kind of long-term vision, the true north, that like our core kind of mantra from an ambition perspective, kind of building off of the notion that we want to be the authority on, high ABV beers. Like I always say, like people come up with these squishy visions that they're trying to achieve. Like you got to put some teeth on it. And so the way I define that, and like we've all rallied behind, is we want a 50% share of the high ABV market space. So initially, in Massachusetts, then in our, adjacent, footprint, but then taking that concept more broadly, because if we are specialists and only doing one thing, then yeah, 1 out of every 2 beers that's above 8% should be a Greater Good beer, and we shouldn't be settling for anything less than that. So that's the like long-term true north, that like day in day out everything that we're doing is geared towards getting to that level. But then short term, it's all about like different ways that you can chip away at that. Like we're trying to grow distribution. Like Pulp Daddy's our flagship. Greylock, which is our biggest beer at 12%, is our second largest brand. But it's like a third the size of Pulp Daddy. So like I'm like, all right, let's get Greylock up to be the level of Pulp Daddy while we're still growing Pulp Daddy, and like you kind of like methodically grow from there. So that's just near term, like how you start chipping away at that. But then I say all the time, like I don't just want us to be the like all Imperial IPA company. Like we are the like all Imperial brewing company. So like we need to be pushing the envelope of what Imperial beers can be. So like this notion of imperializing it all has been like a self mantra. So we're starting to innovate with styles that are traditionally lower ABV that you would never see like in an Imperial version, and try to take them up a notch. So
Obviously, now you have to give me an example of one of those.
so we've had phenomenal success with our sour program this year. Our Funk series is a fruited sour. Like we release a different variant every 2 months, and those have gone gangbusters for us. We have our inaugural Imperial Fest coming up, where we're inviting 30 breweries to our location, doing a big beer festival where they'll showcase all of their Imperial beers, and we're brewing an Imperial Blonde Ale for that. So again, like these styles that are like typically like the crispy boys, low ABV type stuff, like how do we turn them up a notch? We have plans like cooking for like experimenting with like Imperial lagers, Imperial pilsners, like Imperial wheats, which you still don't see that many of. But yeah, just like trying to like push the envelope a little bit and see if we can still kind of maintain that like smooth balance, not harsh booziness, so that we're still putting out like a greater good quality product without while still like having some fun and innovating.
So your Imperial Fest is this September 17th, and beer fest often have a reputation for being places where people go, just drink tons of tasters, and leave a few hours later stumbling away. I imagine your goals are a little bit different than that, despite being an Imperial Beer Fest. What do you envision the guest experience like at this Imperial Fest coming up in September?
I mean, we want to celebrate and showcase Imperial beers because I think anytime people are more exposed to the category and the segment grows, like obviously greater good as the specialist in that is going to benefit. But like we also just, I mean, we want to have fun. Like, I mean, we want to, people like we're gonna have all of the guests like vote on which their favorite of the participant, like the visiting Imperial beers are, and that one we're going to put on as a guest tap in the tap room for a month after the festival. And really, I think celebrating and showcasing the work that our partners are doing, because the best thing about craft beer is, despite competition and all of that, like we see it so much more as a collaborative community, and to be able to like lean into that. I'm just really excited about it. And the reception that we have gotten, like, oh my God, like when we announced it, instantly, like highest engagement social post, people were like going crazy about it. Like, I think overnight, like we reached out to breweries and I thought like, oh, like, do you think we're going to be able to get like 20 to 30 who want to participate? Like, bam, like overnight, and more people still like reaching out, like, can we participate? And I'm like, this is our first year. Like, we've never run a beer festival, so like we want to keep it manageable, like the first time. But then we just released ticket sales on the 1st of August, and we're already almost sold out of tickets.
Congratulations.
Of like at least the first release. I'm trying to talk to my tent guy and see if we can get the next size up and fit more people in without everyone being packed in like sardines.
I mean, you need a bigger, bolder, stronger tent, don't you?
Exactly. So I was like, what's your biggest, boldest, strongest tent? And that's the one I want to sign up for. So we're hoping we'll be able to open more. But I mean, we've been so happy that like the reception that we've got towards this idea is really strong, and I couldn't be happier about at least all of the like pre-event reaction. Hopefully, we're not trying to pull any like Fire Fest type stuff where things go like haywire. So hopefully it all runs smoothly as well.
Like your Fire Fest situation would be, I show up at the fest and there's no Imperial beers.
Yes, that will 100% not be the case. So we're very covered on that.
Oh, awesome. No, looking at your time so far at Greater Good, what are you most proud of, Colleen?
No, I think the team all really rallying behind that collective vision and not being scared of a statement like one out of every two high ABV beers should be a Greater Good beer. I think people are getting jazzed about that. Where I think it'd be, if anything, I think, Greater Good had probably been like humbled to a fault before. Your little guys back there. But but yeah, I think just being able to like see how the teams really rallied behind that shared vision has probably been the thing that I'm most excited about.
Now, I have one final question for you because it's been really exciting. And this is the first time ever he's come in the room on one of these.
I know, you've never invited the little guy when we've talked before. I feel just
Imperial things yet. He's still on like 1% milk. We're not ready to take him up to the higher octane just yet. So,
got it.
Appearance today. But, looking ahead, and I'm excited to eventually try the beers and experience the Greater Good, everything.
I'll definitely send some to you for sure.
I appreciate that. But, one last question for you. On your website, I always love it when a brewery has a section, highlighting all the team members doing all the hard work. So looks like you have a fantastic team. But the first person on your website is Chugs, your mascot. And Chugs is a moose. Is that correct?
Yes, he's a moose.
Why is Chugs a moose? And tell me more about this Chugs.
So the moose as kind of the like logo, because it's a moose skull that we have as our Greater Good logo, is because the moose is the like largest terrestrial animal in the US. So like it's a big, bold, strong animal. So that was the inspiration behind the moose as the like logo for it. And then it's kind of this like not many breweries have mascots, so like let's try something different. I do feel bad that we make our teammate JT, who you maybe saw on the website. He's been with the company forever. He wears every different hat. Sometimes that hat happens to be a moose head. So he's always our guy dressing up as Chugs. Just this morning, he was doing a little bit of a Chugs photo shoot. Who knows what's going to pop up on social media with Chugs based on that. But he's a trooper about it. And it's just like a fun and like different way to like, we come into a sampling, right, where it's like, Chugs like pouring beers and like, again, it's just something different, bolder, a little bit more impactful.
Now, can we expect Chugs at the Imperial Fest coming up?
He will probably make some appearances throughout the day. I will never make JT spend like 4 hours straight in the Chugs costume. So I feel like it's always like Superman versus Clark Kent, where like he's changing really quickly, and then like Clark's back, and it's like, oh, where did Superman go? You just missed him. And it's kind of the same with JT and Chugs.
I love it. I love everything that Greater Good stands for. I'm so excited for your next chapter there and to see what you do with the company. And it seems like it's a perfect fit.
Thank you so much. It's been a blast. And, it's always great to reconnect with you and tell you kind of what the next era of things have looked like in my life.
I truly hope in this next era we actually get to share beers face to face at some point.
At some point, right, man? Like we've been saying it for years now at this point.
We're going to have that location. We're at the same time. We're going to have to plan it. And I can't wait for it, Colleen. Well, I'm super excited for you. Thank you for taking this time today. And is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I mean, just keep doing what you guys are doing. Because like I said, I mean, it's such a great community. And, the fact that like Paul had seen one of the presentations that I did was certainly a part of my journey to get to where I am. So gotta love that, like, that's actually like truly like connecting with people and having an impact. So love what you guys are doing and happy to be a part of the community.
And I appreciate you as well. And I won't hassle you about submitting a proposal for this fall conference. You've got your hands full right now.
I'm a little bit busy. Maybe spring I'll get back on the circuit.
Sounds like a plan. We'll have an amazing fest. See you soon and have a great day.
Awesome. Later, dude.
Hey, Colleen.